Hello and welcome back to Rooted and Resilient, the podcast that explores how we can apply the timeless wisdom of the Bible to our complicated lives today. I'm your host, Jennifer Carter, and I know what it's like to live through challenging times or seasons of waiting, face change or loss. But as a woman who's been there, I also know that God can use each and every season of our lives for His purposes and our good, even when that seems pretty unlikely. So today, we're diving into a story that is so much more than the love story it seems to be at first glance. It's a tale of courage in the face of adversity and uncertainty. It's the story of Ruth and Naomi. You can find this story in the book of Ruth. Because in the middle of their pain and struggles, Ruth and Naomi discovered that God was writing His bigger story. And I believe He's doing the same with your life and my life too. Have you ever looked around and thought, this isn't how I thought my life would turn out? Maybe you feel that you're standing at a crossroads with no clear way forward, or you're living with loss and pain that feels unbearable and you're unsure of how to move on. That's exactly where Naomi found herself at the beginning of the book of Ruth. Yes, Naomi. We're going to look at Naomi's story as well as Ruth's. Naomi and her husband had left Bethlehem because of a famine, and they hoped for a better life in Moab. But instead of finding stability, Naomi experienced a devastating loss. Her husband died, and then, tragically, both of her sons. She was left alone, a widow in a foreign land, with no one to provide for her or protect her. Like Naomi, sometimes life throws us curveballs we never expected it to, doesn't it? Maybe you never thought you'd be navigating life alone, yet here you are, rebuilding after a divorce. Or perhaps you're adjusting to an empty nest in a home that feels far too quiet. Perhaps you're questioning your purpose now, wondering where you fit in. When life takes an unexpected turn, it's all too easy to feel unseen and even wonder if God's forgotten you. But here's the thing. Even when Naomi couldn't see it, God was still at work. He hadn't forgotten her, and in fact, He was about to take that emptiness, loss, pain, and heartache and give her a new purpose. Now, although Naomi's sons died, she was living with her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, and when she decided to return to Bethlehem, she urged them to stay in Moab. She wanted to give them a chance at new life, even when that meant saying goodbye. So as they wept together at their parting, Orpah kissed Naomi farewell, but Ruth clung tightly to her mother-in-law. And she uttered some of the most beautiful words we see in Scripture when she vowed to stay with Naomi, no matter what. When she said, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." That's from Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, if you want to see what it looks like in your own version of the Bible. Talk about a leap of faith. Ruth vowed to stay with Naomi no matter what. Ruth was giving up everything that was familiar to her family, her chance to remarry, even her country, to step into an unknown future with Naomi. Now, her words are often said to speak of the loyalty between her and her mother-in-law, but if you look closely, I believe it's so much more than this. It was a step of faith. Because when Ruth says, "Your God, my God," Ruth is saying that she has put her trust in the God of Israel, and she's choosing to believe that He will provide and make a way, even after the deep loss she suffered, even when the path ahead is unclear. And here's the thing. When Ruth stepped out, she had no idea what God was going to do. She had no idea that God was about to write her story in a way she could never have imagined. And through a series of events that only God could orchestrate, she ends up gleaning in the field of Boaz, a rich relative of Naomi's. Now, Boaz has heard about Ruth and how she's cared for her mother-in-law, and he chooses to go above and beyond to provide for and protect her in his fields. In fact, he went far beyond what the law required him to do for this stranger, who was really an outcast of society. He was a man above the rest because he saw past the surface to the character and the woman behind the tattered garment or the dust-covered clothes. Now, this tells us something about Boaz. He wasn't just a generous man. He was a man who reflected God's own heart. He didn't see Ruth as an outsider or even a burden. He saw her as someone worth honouring and protecting. And in this way, he foreshadows Jesus because he sees past our brokenness and calls us worthy, loved, and chosen. And one thing really struck me about this story, because what we sometimes dismiss as coincidence may actually be God's carefully orchestrated providence. Ruth didn't choose Boaz's field, she just went out to glean and happened to land in the field of a man who was her kinsman redeemer. But was it really just chance? I don't believe it was. God was weaving together the threads of her story and his. What looked like a random choice was actually a divine appointment. God was guiding her steps even when she couldn't see it. And I believe he's doing the same for us too. Those moments we chalk up to luck or coincidence, the unexpected meeting, the seemingly random conversation, the opportunity that appears out of nowhere. I believe that often God's hand directing us and providing for us. Think back over your life. When have you experienced what seemed like a random moment that later revealed itself as so much more? Maybe it was a conversation that came at just the right time, a connection that appeared unexpectedly, a door that opened when you least expected it. Have you ever gotten a call from an old friend just when you needed encouragement? Or maybe you've moved to a new church and ended up meeting people who changed your life in ways you never expected. I believe these moments, the ones we can easily dismiss as luck or coincidence, are often divine appointments. So next time you experience something that might at first seem like mere coincidence, stop for a second or two, look closer and ask yourself, could this be God orchestrating something for my good that I can't yet see? What I've learned through my own seasons of waiting and wondering is that just because you feel lost or even have lost sight of God yourself doesn't mean that he's lost sight of you. And in those moments when it feels as if you're drifting, God is still at work, molding and shaping you. Maybe you're in that challenging empty nest season, or you've experienced a painful divorce. Perhaps you're struggling to find your purpose. Here's what I've discovered. God doesn't waste a single moment of our journey. Those seemingly chance encounters, they're not chances at all. That conversation that unexpectedly encouraged you, the opportunity that appeared out of nowhere, the friend that reached out at just the right moment, they're not accidents. They're God's gentle interventions, his way of saying, I see you. I'm working on your behalf. Trust me. In an incredible twist to this story, Boaz ends up marrying Ruth and redeeming the land that had belonged to Naomi's family. Ruth, the outsider, the widow, the immigrant, becomes the great-grandmother of King David and a part of Jesus' lineage. I think that's pretty amazing, and it's a reminder that no matter how insignificant we feel, no matter how broken our story seems, God can use it for his purposes and his glory. He's the master at writing redemption stories. But there's one thing that really struck me as I studied this story. Ruth wasn't the only one being redeemed. If you've ever watched the movie Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, perhaps you remember the line right at the end of the movie where they're talking about how their story might end, of how this rich man might end up with this prostitute. And he asks her how the story ends. And she says she rescues him right back. And I think in this story, what's beautiful is that through her selflessness and her dedication to her mother-in-law, actually Ruth became a redeemer herself. Boaz was rich and influential. He may have been Ruth's redeemer, but Ruth rescued him right back. She redeemed him too. Because before Boaz met her, he was a man of means, but he didn't have a family, he didn't have love, and he wasn't going to be able to leave a legacy. But Ruth's courage and her willingness to step into the unknown didn't just change her life, it changed his too. Her faithfulness didn't just give her a new future, it gave Boaz one too. And I believe the same is true for you and me too. We may feel weak and like our lives are too messy for God to use. But Ruth's story shows us that, even in our weakness, God's strength can shine through. We too can become world changers through our daily choices, the small acts of obedience, small acts of kindness and love. God can use those things to bring change to the world around us. Ruth and Naomi's story is also a story about the power of friendship. Their bond broke barriers of age, nationality, and of circumstance. They were women who cried together, travelled together, and held one another when times were tough. In a world that can often feel fragmented, their story is a reminder of how much we need one another. And I believe their story challenges us to build deeper friendships, to really show commitment to one another as we walk together through life's ups and downs. There's an African saying about walking with someone as they navigate a season of grief and loss. And isn't that exactly what Ruth did for Naomi? She didn't just offer her words of comfort. She stayed, walked alongside her, shared in her sorrow. There's a really powerful and moving moment in the movie What Dreams May Come, where Chris, played by Robin Williams, after trying to rescue his wife from hell, decides that the only way to rescue her is to join her there. He chooses to stay with her in her suffering, refusing to leave her alone in her despair, knowing that he, like she has, will lose his sanity and his mind. And in that act of love, something shifts. His presence changes everything, and in the end, it's what leads to her redemption. And isn't that just what Ruth did for Naomi, and what Boaz in turn did for Ruth? True redemption isn't about rescuing someone, it's about walking with them, standing beside them in their pain and refusing to let them go. And of course, that's what Jesus has done for us. Just like Ruth with Naomi, just like Chris in What Dreams May Come, Jesus meets us in our deepest sorrows and refuses to leave us there. He steps into our pain, walks with us through it, and this changes everything. So as you navigate your own season of uncertainty or brokenness, remember your story isn't over yet. There are many pages yet to be written. The same God who took Ruth from the threshing floor to the throne room is at work in our lives too. It takes courage to step out in faith like Ruth did, to love selflessly in the same way as she loved Naomi. And it takes faith to trust that God can use us. And it takes real love to be the kind of friend that walks alongside others when their lives are falling apart and their hearts are breaking. But when we do, I believe we open the door for God's story to break into their lives and into our own. Because there's one final thing I discovered in Ruth's story. God specializes in using nobodies to do something extraordinary. Think about it. Ruth was a foreign widow, an immigrant, penniless. She had no status, no power, no connections. Naomi was a bitter, broken woman who'd lost everything. Boaz was an older man who'd given up on having a family and leaving a legacy. So as I read their story, what really hit me was this. God isn't looking for perfect people, and he doesn't wait until we have it all together. In fact, he loves to use our brokenness and our weaknesses to accomplish his purposes. This was certainly true for Ruth. She was simply doing the most mundane and backbreaking job possible. She was gleaning leftover grain in a field. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just trying to survive, to provide for her mother-in-law. And yet in that moment, God was weaving her into the very lineage of Jesus. I think that's pretty incredible. Our ordinary moments, our small steps of faith, even those seasons of life where we feel overlooked, ignored, or just simply broken, God sees them. God sees us. And he's working through those moments and preparing something far bigger than we could ever imagine. God used two broken women to change history. And I believe he can do the same for you too. So if you've ever felt too broken, too old, or too unworthy, I want you to hear me when I say this. God's not done with you yet. So keep holding on to hope. Keep trusting. Keep putting one foot in front of the other in faith, and keep saying yes to whatever God's doing in your life. Thanks for spending time with me today. If something from this episode has spoken to your heart, I'd love you to just take a couple of moments to leave a review. And I'd love to invite you to grab a free copy of Meeting Jesus, a short devotional about 7 women who met Jesus. And for a short time only, the ebook and the audiobook are available completely for free. So head over to jennifercarterbooks.com and grab yourself a copy. In the next episode, we're going to meet a woman whose story might make you rethink what it means when life takes an unexpected detour. Hagar was a woman who found herself in the wilderness not just once, but twice. So if you've ever felt like your mistakes or someone else's have left you stranded or in the wilderness, this one's for you. What I love about Hagar's story is that it shows us that sometimes our biggest setbacks, even the ones caused by our own or other people's poor choices, can become the very moments when God shows up unexpectedly. Join me as we meet Hagar in her darkest hour and see how God reveals himself to her as the God who sees. Because just like Hagar discovered in the wilderness, God isn't finished with your story yet.